buy with someone who will build it for you in the way you want it, in the context of like design partnerships, let's say, with smaller companies that are more nimble, that haven't been, for better or worse, I'm going to use the word trapped by their product market fit, ACI's key control indicators, which again is more of an effectiveness measure of, are controls operating effectively? Are they everywhere they need to be? Do we have healthy control coverage around that control, that kind of thing? It's like a lot of third-party risk is really just first-party risk. How we've implemented the vendor solution is risky.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of season 2 of the GRC Engineering Podcast. It's only been a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years, I don't know, since the last episode aired. So I'm very glad to kind of resume the podcast. And I think the perfect guest for the first episode of season 2 is Justin. So Justin has been working in security for a bit over a decade now. He's currently the Director of Security, Risk and Trust at Klaviyo. And he's also known for kind of helping spearhead the GRC engineering initiative, especially he's been the key masterpiece in building the GRC.engineering website, also building the whole GRC engineering community, including the LinkedIn group, and also different ways through which we can all collaborate, especially the manifesto that was published a couple months ago that had quite a good readership and has been picked up by quite a big number of security leaders since then, which is a great credit to him and his kind of thought leadership on that front. So I'm very happy to have you with me, Justin, today. And
well, thanks for having me.
If you want to add anything to your intro, if you think it was good enough, not good enough, just tell me.
Well, I have to give all the credit where it's due in terms of how, like, I see you, Ayub, as the godfather of GRC engineering, in terms of like the podcast, and that's how I got exposed even to the concept in the wording of it. GRC engineering was seeing your podcast and then seeing all the chatter around it. And there are, other people who we've been working with around the manifesto and stuff who contribute a lot of great ideas to that too. So I appreciate the kind words and the credit you're giving me, but there's a lot of credit to go around in terms of, where we're at today with this notion of GRC engineering and the community, which was already organically building up around it in part due to your work in this area. And I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about it some more and other things, of course.
So yeah, I really think kind of momentum is building around this, which is really good to see. I think if we just look back maybe a year ago or 6 months ago, I think it was still in its infancy. I think there's a lot more discussions around it. It's getting a lot more mainstream now that, the way we do GRC has to change to an extent and move a bit closer to, kind of the engineering practices. So first questions I like to ask my guests is kind of your history with GRC in particular. So throughout your career, how did you get exposed to it the first time? What were the first things that, really like tickled you in terms of like either that's nice or like there's no way we do things that way? Get a bit of your genesis around GRC.
Yeah, so without realizing it at the time, my first job out of college at PNC Bank, I was working as a software engineer as part of a database operations group they had there. And it was myself and my team lead manager, who was the other software engineer there, showing me the ropes, teaching me a lot of things. And we were there to really support all the database administrators, the DBAs, in providing metrics and reports and automating some of the workflows and processes they would have to deal with, some of which included GRC related processes like user access reviews and access recertifications. Which was one of the things I had to do, which was, every 3 months, run some scripts and some SQL to pull together a list of all the different database, human and machine users and understand which ones have access to what resources and which ones shouldn't have that access anymore. Also got exposed to working with our internal audit group there on some of the database specific compliance controls that they would be the third line of defense auditors for, and they would come to me to say, hey, Justin, can you update this report in Lotus? And we were using Lotus Notes. If you've ever heard of that, if anyone's ever heard, we had Lotus Notes applications that we built to provide this information to them. So that was when I first started getting exposed to GRC related problems and processes and whatnot. Didn't know it at the time that was considered GRC. I had always been really eager to get into information security and cybersecurity. And in that regard, I had pursued another role after PNC at Freddie Mac as part of a rotation program they had there. And I started out there working as a software engineer again, but focused on remediating application security vulnerabilities that the information security team was detecting and reporting to us using, their AppSec static application security tool. And soon thereafter, I rotated into the InfoSec group on the governance team. They actually had a GRC group that was structured in terms of this is the governance team, this is the risk team, this is the compliance team. So I started out working in the governance world, getting exposure to the concept of security policies and standards, and what those are and why they are the way they are, how they relate to some of the compliance frameworks that were relevant to Freddie Mac. I got exposed to what the team at the time called governance engineering, which was using a GRC platform. There was a team lead who I worked with who had a GRC platform. I think it was Agile Alliance Risk Vision. And he was just the system administrator trying to configure all the workflows and processes and structuring the asset inventory feature that other teams could plug into and use. So I helped with that a bit. The risk management team, the manager there, he sat, I think, like 20 feet away from me in a different cubicle area. And even before my rotation ended, my 6-month rotation ended, he would come over and ask like, hey, do you want to help us with this risk assessment work and these vendor assessments? And before I knew it, I was part of the risk team doing internal security risk assessments for different projects that teams were working on, doing vendor security risk assessments, doing some light, web application penetration testing for internal web apps people were building or updating, and also got exposure especially from like a vendor security assessment perspective to compliance audit frameworks and compliance controls with especially things like SOC 2. I had started doing that work right around the time SAS 70 was going out of style and SSA 16 showed up as the new, foundation for SOC 2 based audits. And this was also around the time where the move to the cloud was becoming a thing. So I got a lot of exposure to like, oh man, how do we make sense of third-party risk in the context of all of our data just living in someone else's servers all the time? And so that was really where I got fully exposed to the world of GRC. When I moved to Rapid7, I was the first security engineer on a new security team that was being built up. The company was still relatively small, a few hundred people. It was myself and the head of security at the time who were just trying to do all the security things that we could, including GRC, but also, vulnerability management, threat detection, incident response. But over time, as the security team at Rapid7 started to grow and specialize a little more, I transitioned some of those GRC responsibilities to the growing up and coming GRC team, and then focused primarily on security operations and engineering. And now I'm back in the GRC world at Klaviyo, and it's fantastic. It's phenomenal. But for anyone who's listening, I would be remiss to just say like, oh, it's not Klaviyo, even though it looks like that at face value. It's Klaviyo.
Klaviyo. Okay.
Klaviyo. It comes from the Spanish word clavia, which means like it's like a pin that you use when you're rock climbing to scale, steep inclines and mountain faces and whatnot. And that's kind of a metaphor for Klaviyo. We're scaling this huge mountain and helping our customers scale this huge mountain to get to this amazing peak. And we are Klaviyo, the support that they use to get there, in a sense.
Wow, that's a very inspirational company name. I like that. This is good. But yeah, your experience has been very varied. You were on the receiving end of audits, like kind of providing evidence. Then you're able to kind of do it from the inside, and all different functions as well, like governance, risk, compliance. and then kind of like spearheading a new function, and then moving to SecOps, and then moving back to GRC. I think it's like you had the complete package, and you started as a software engineer. So it's like you've been
And
through the
I'll admit,
block.
not a very good one. I was not, yeah, but as much as I liked it, I was not super great at
Yeah, it's fine. You had the title, which is all that counts.
it. Right, right.
But yeah, it's a very interesting kind of background. So during that career, you had lots of opportunities to interact with the GRT teams, either as part of it yourself or as someone that would provide information to them. What were the kind of like pet peeves you've seen in your career? It spans different like eras, kind of, because you started like kind of pre-cloud as well. So what were like in your career like a couple of things where you see it done a certain way and you're like, oh, I hate this.
You know, it I didn't realize it at the time, I think. Um, this one pet peeve I'm about to mention around manually creating documentation as an artifact of demonstrating risk or for demonstrating risk and communicating risk and understanding it over time. Um, it wasn't until when I was at Freddie Mac where I was doing a lot of documentation heavy work, writing up, multi-page or dozen plus page risk assessment reports and meeting with risk owners and debriefing them about it and helping them understand it. I didn't realize at the time how ineffective that approach to GRC work is, or really just in general, any kind of security work, until we had an internal audit done at Freddie Mac with our third line of defense team, where they audited our information security risk management program. And in the audit report that they shared with us, and I remember there was a day where we were all standing around someone's desk reading it, and I think it was like page 38 or something of the audit report, where the conclusion about the security risk management program at the time at Freddie Mac was, I quote, ineffective. The security risk management function is ineffective, period, as in it is having no effect one way or the other. And I was like, I've been spending how much time doing these assessments, doing these internal web app pen tests, writing up these reports, meeting with these teams, and you're saying I haven't moved the needle at all? That sucks. Like, that sucks for me, but it also sucks to think that we're not getting better. We're not achieving better outcomes and minimizing risk or managing risk in effective ways. Why? Like, why is it ineffective? So ever since that point in time, I've been mildly obsessed with always trying to understand what does effective look like in the context of this GRC role, this SecOps role, this, et cetera, security function that I've been working in. And yeah, having to manually write up documentation to prove something or to measure or convey a measurement of something like risk it is a pet peeve, but the deeper pet peeve is doing any kind of work that doesn't have any positive impact. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, like a question I have, kind of piggybacking what you said, why do you think in GRC, we have this like heightened feeling of like a bigger portion of our work feels ineffective? So, if I work in AppSec, maybe like some of the stuff I'm doing, I might think, they're like lower value and stuff, but I'm not as sure. Like my experience speaking with like AppSec professionals, they would not think as much, like as big of a percentage of their daily kind of tasks are like not really moving the bottom line, like really helping drive down the risk, and help mitigate the biggest threats and stuff. And I think in GRC there's a higher percentage. What would you what would you say it's like more likely for us working in this field to feel like a portion of our work is not really helping?
I want to say it has to do largely with the fact that we tend to be a few more degrees removed from the problems that we're trying to solve or prevent or manage. When you think about an AppSec function or security operations team or what have you, in the context of cybersecurity risk, the problems tend to be malicious threats and the threat actors that, create that threat. And, an application security practitioner is focused on, let's say, avoiding the deployment of or remediating already deployed vulnerabilities in our applications where there is exposure to threats, where those like the threat actors of the world can exploit those vulnerabilities easily, impact systems or data, where those vulnerabilities exist around. But for GRC practitioners, we are a degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees removed from that when we're working on trying to write up policies around vulnerability management requirements for a company. And those policies exist as documents, and we talk with other people about those documents, and the people who actually do the work to solve the problem, to reduce risk, are separate from us. So we don't exactly work on the front lines of defense in the context of this big area of cyber risk. It's not the only area of cyber risk. But it tends to be the most prominent one or prevalent one, I would say, that people deal with or think about when they think about, like, am I having an impact, a positive impact on what I'm here to do at this organization, which is to help the organization I work at balance minimizing the negative risks associated with cybersecurity problems we have with all the positive risks of whatever our organization is set out to do from a mission perspective, right? And I think that also creates some pain as well for folks in security, but especially in GRC, is like, how am I helping the company with that balancing act? Not only do I feel like I'm not having much of a direct effect on minimizing these nasty looking security risks, but is the work I'm doing helping the company make progress forward in achieving our company goals and providing value to our customers in the long run? And so it just feels like, we're working behind closed doors, creating documents, having meetings, and it's hard to know, at a minimum, it's hard to know, have I had a positive impact? What does it even look like to know that I've had a positive impact?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Sometimes it's a bit abstract to kind of like grasp like the value add you're getting. There's a lot of, maybe you could call it like meta work, like meta security work, where you kind of a great ambassador of what the rest of the security org is doing. And on the other side, you kind of also spearhead the business side of the security team, just because you're closer to whatever like what you do will impact in terms of additional sales, because potentially new certifications break into new markets, and also like like reducing the overall risk posture of the company might help when you report to the audit committee and stuff like this. So like the impact can feel a bit indirect, and I think that's why GRC engineering helps so much, because a big part of it is also about visibility, like how you view like the controls, are they effective, like having a more quantified approach to a risk program. And I think it ties back to like having the value of GRC a lot more in your face, just because it's a lot easier to track it when it's in a way where it can be ingested easily. It's in a format that is machine readable, and all these things also make your value add a bit more straightforward, especially when you work with engineers.
Straightforward and easier to understand at any point in time.
Yeah.
How is my value add changing over time, right? Having to figure that out manually anytime you want to understand it, terribly painful and inefficient, and creates that sort of opaqueness around, I don't know if I'm having value or contributing value to this organization or not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that's a good segue. Of course, there's been the manifesto that's been published a couple months ago, and kind of a lot of work happening around the kind of GRC engineering community. I wanted to kind of have your behind the scenes on like how this whole manifesto was built and kind of community that is also building around it, as you've been a driving force on this along with all the other main contributors. So I wanted to have kind of a sneak peek into how things
Yeah.
were done.
I feel like we need to add a history section to grc.engineering now. Sort of like with the Agile manifesto, they give you the background on,
Oh
they
yeah.
were in like a cabin in the woods somewhere, 8 engineers who were pissed off about whatever. Well, if you remember, I think you do, I reached out to you on LinkedIn because I was like, hey, this GRC engineering concept and your thought leadership around it, I think is awesome. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. And also, it looks like a lot of other people are gravitating around this concept, trying to put shape to it. And there's a lot of organic excitement and interest around it.
Yeah.
What if we did something intentional to harness that organic interest and excitement to accelerate the clarification of what GRC engineering is and to bring a community of practitioners together to share examples around here are the problems I'm dealing with that I would love to figure out how GRC engineering can help with, but also here's how we've been experimenting with GRC engineering-esque approaches to solving those problems. Here's where we're seeing value around it, right? So, and I remember reaching out to you talking about it relative to how the origins of DevSecOps began. The true definition of DevSecOps, not the marketing-oriented definition of it that is evolved from that original definition over the years. It was like, hey, I remember back in, I think it was like 2015 at an AWS reInvent conference, I saw a talk from Shannon Leitz, I think I'm saying that correctly, where she talked about DevSecOps and what does it mean? And she was talking about it from a practitioner perspective and what the problems were that DevSecOps was setting out to solve. And it just made so much sense. And the intentionality around trying to put shape around this concept of a new way of doing things to address these problems in a better way than we've been able to before was really inspiring. And it just seemed like, hey, the same moment is here for GRC engineering. Let's harness it and let's make it happen. So, I reached out to a few other folks. You reached out to a few other folks, Charles at Netflix and Tara and Akshay and you can see all the authors on grc.engineering. I don't want to
Yeah.
forget all the names right off the cuff there, but we had a great conversation going in Slack. We had that Google Doc where people were contributing their ideas, and it just all of a sudden started coming together. These foundational principles we have around GRC engineering and what those fundamental problems are around what we call traditional GRC that we seek to solve with GRC engineering. And the hypothesis, I think, ended up being correct that yes, the organic interest is there. People do want to participate in defining what this thing is more clearly and sharing both their pain points around GRC and the solution ideas that fit into the GRC engineering realm that can help solve those pain points better.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think yeah, the comparison with DevSecOps is also very accurate. Because I think it's like a concept itself that needed kind of an additional value add just to make sure it fitted with the current context of how software is produced, etc. And I think, of course, a lot of it right now is driven by compliance. I think it's where the modernization happens the most. I think it's probably where it was needed the most, as well, just because, audit firms, they were driving a way of doing things that is also inherited from IT audit itself, inherited from financial auditing. So there's like a lot of history that can go back probably half a century or something. So I think that was where like kind of disruption was necessary. So I have a question for you. So if I think about GRC engineering, and I'm like, I'm thinking build versus buy, okay? And when I hear GRC engineering, I'm thinking building because I'm like engineering means, you have resources either fully committed or partially committed to like building solutions for like your specific GRC needs or specific GRC problems. So why would I need to build where there's like this whole industry of software that is, kind of dedicated to help me, pass and get like a more real-time monitoring of my controls, etc.
You're asking me why you should build things?
No, not me personally,
Just in
but
general,
if you
yeah.
convince me, I'll follow your
Yeah.
advice.
Honestly, I think the build versus buy point and the different ways it is made and brought up in conversations is becoming a little trite, in the sense that it's a valid question to answer for any given challenge you're dealing with that you're trying to solve in the context of the resources you have at your organization and the skills you have on your team, right? It should be a more straightforward question to answer, and it shouldn't be seen or perceived as a sort of, what's the right way to phrase this? A sort of like test of your competency as a practitioner. Like, hey, if you're not like focused on building, like you're not doing it right, or you're not a great practitioner because you don't have the skills to build the thing. I'm not sure. I sometimes get the impression that there's a little bit of dogmatism behind the conversation in context when people bring it up. I think it should be much more straightforward, though, when you think about how to figure out what the answer to that question should be for you, for your team, and the context you're operating within. If it is more cost effective to build or buy, and what you are building or buying is clearly going to provide value in terms of solving the very clearly understood problems you're trying to solve, et cetera, like it should be more straightforward and less dogmatism involved in the decision making around whether or not to build or buy. I'll give you a good example. Third-party risk management. Kind of on a tear lately about third-party risk management. I think the build versus buy question around this realm is a little more interesting and nuanced. I actually think there's a third question to try to answer as part of a third option to choose from in the question, which is buy with someone who will build it for you in the way you want it, in the context of like design partnerships, let's say, with smaller companies that are more nimble, that haven't been, for better or worse, I'm going to use the word trapped by their product market fit. Because I think product market fit, it's a blessing and a curse. The blessing is you've delivered value to a certain part of the market in a way that part of the market is looking for that value. And now you're making a lot of money and you're getting a lot of traction. But now you've got hundreds, thousands of customers who are submitting all sorts of bug reports and feature requests, and you're dealing with a lot of sort of tactical, let's say, reactiveness to those product market forces. And you're not thinking as innovatively as you once were around problems that need a lot of innovative things. So third-party risk management comes to mind for me because I truly believe, by and large, no one is doing it right, or doing it in the ways that would fall into the category of right ways to do. I don't think there's one right answer, but I think there is a spectrum of right answers and a spectrum, other end of the spectrum, of wrong answers to how to solve the problem of third-party risk management. And the build versus buy questioning in this area, in my mind, depending on the organization you're at, the resources you have, the skills you have, it could be really, really challenging to build a solution that really addresses the challenges of third-party risk management well. But also the options to buy out there today aren't that great, because lots of reasons I'm not going to go into right now. I'll write a blog post about it later. But the third option, the middle ground option, is like, hey, there are innovators out there in the third-party risk management product space who don't have a lot of customers yet, who have bold vision around how to do TPRM better. And if your vision for what you want aligns with theirs, mostly or largely, try to negotiate a strategic partnership to say, hey, look, we'll be a customer of yours, but we want to be a design partner. And we want to be a design partner because we trust that you have the long-term picture in mind and you know how to help us get there. And we want to be able to shape how you're building this product to continue to serve our needs. Let's do it together, kind of thing.
Yeah,
but like that's just for TPRM. For other domains, for other contexts, depending on the organization you're at, building or buying, build could be good, buy could be good. It just depends.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not straightforward yes or no, but I also agree that like the third way, where you find a smaller vendor, could get you on board as you said, kind of a strategic partner, then you can actually get what you need but be built by someone else. And then you can outsource the engineering work, but the thought into like how it's actually solving your very specific use cases, you can actually get it not to the point specifically, but like a lot better than anything else you could get, because they're listening to your feedback and they get you on discussion of the product management, leadership, etc. So I think it's yeah, it's a great solution, definitely. And I think people not like, I really like your point around like shaming, trying to shame people because they're not building instead of buying. I think companies, they're not in the business of like craftsmanship, they're in the business of making money. And I think being able to be the best craftsman of whatever software, like anyone that works in actual software engineering knows, like you need it working before you need it ready. So I think it's important to really focus on solving problems, and if buying a solution is the best way to solve it, then you need to think about it that way, instead of thinking like, if I don't build it, then I'm not worthy or whatever else.
I think the point about shame is a good one, because I think we should be careful about the value judgment that gets wrapped around the conversation of,
Yes.
oh, it's inherently more valuable to build things. It's like, well, no, it depends. Let's be practical about it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So to help highlight also this, like, what would you say if you had your GRC engineering program? What would you say are like good like success metrics? So I'll give you some examples. So if I think about like number of manual steps removed, or like number of like headcount time saved, or better visibility across, like, let's say the kind of GRC data lake, like assessments and controls and risks, etc. What would you say are good ways to gauge if like your program is going to the right direction and you're getting the outcome you want in the first place?
Mm, it's a really good question. I mean, it sounds like the crux of the question has a lot to do with understanding the efficiency, how efficient you're being. Just that's part of it, I heard. And I think the other part is, how effective are you at solving the problems you've set out to solve in the world of GRC. The mental model I have, which it's not a unique thing, it's out there. I'm sure I borrowed this from many other people in the world, around how to think about success metrics, especially in the world of security and GRC, are KPIs, key performance indicators, which in my mind cover metrics that demonstrate efficiency, primarily efficiency, process efficiency. KRIs, key risk indicators, in the context of GRC, the risks we're talking about are security risks, and being able to measure the magnitude of risk in your environment, the likelihood of risk in your environment, and also your effectiveness in managing the risk in accordance with the goals you've established around what it looks like for us as a company to manage risk effectively. And then KCIs, key control indicators, which again is more of an effectiveness measure of, are our controls operating effectively? Are they everywhere they need to be? Do we have healthy control coverage around that control, that kind of thing? On the efficiency side of the house, thinking about how to define metrics around efficiencies and KPIs. I think, I think this is one of the reasons why we put systems thinking in the GRC Engineering Manifesto, because it is such a broad concept and tool for being able to, one, understand the big picture of a problem you're trying to solve, all the moving parts that exist within that problem, and how they interrelate as a system of things to have outcomes and effects. So to think about a process like third-party risk management, I'll just go back to that. What does it mean to be efficient at third-party risk management, while also keeping in mind what it means to be effective? Because if you create efficiency, we've sped up our process by 3,000%.
Yeah.
But you've lost sight of effectiveness, of the positive outcomes you're trying to achieve. Well, great, you've just sped up a bad process. You're still not achieving positive outcomes. So when you think about efficiency, you still need to keep in mind effectiveness. Do not lose sight of it, because you're spinning your wheels at that point and not creating any forward motion. But efficiency in the context of something like third-party risk management could look something like, well, today, the way we do our third-party risk management process, the way we run it, involves triaging a procurement request. That's one stage of the process. Asking the vendor for information so we can understand what kind of risk they present to us. Asking the business owner for information about the use case they have so we can understand the business context that is at risk when we work with this vendor. And then producing a risk assessment report, let's say, or a set of findings and mitigation recommendations in some format, and then having a decision made about the risk. So those are roughly 4 stages of a process, and time is a component of each stage in the process, and efficiency a lot of times has to do with time spent doing a thing. Like, hey, today it takes us 10 days to go from triage requests to get information back from the vendor to create risk assessment results. How could we make that faster without degrading the outcome we want to achieve? Okay, let's introduce this automation at this stage. That'll reduce the time it takes by 90%. Now we went from a 10-day set of steps to a 2-day set of steps, right? Yeah, I'm just riffing, right? Like, I think what matters is having a clear understanding of the problem you're trying to solve, both in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, and then to deconstruct it and focus on one thing at a time, right? Let's just focus on the triage stage. What can we do to get faster at triage? What can we do to simplify the triage stage, which sort of implies we will be faster at doing it while reducing wasted time in the process, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I like how you kind of have this efficiency and effectiveness split, and I like how you think about like kind of digging deeper into each process instead of like you need to think about things as a whole, but then when you need to find specific ways of making things better and faster, you need to think more micro, just because that's where you can actually see the specific things that could be erased, made different, etc. Whereas as a whole process is more complicated just because, you can't really see the moving pieces in detail. I like it. But let's say you won, you succeeded, okay? You were able to, you were able to have all your processes more effective and more efficient. If you think about compliance, the question I wanted to ask you is 2 questions in one, but the first question would be around what do you think will be the outcome? Because like the more efficient we are, the more what we get could be had faster and more effectively. So potentially compliance, certification, and attestations could be having, could take us months, now weeks. I don't want to say days. That would be an overstatement, but it could be a lot faster. My vision on that is the faster you get it, potentially it could be seen as having less value in of itself, just because they see a correlation between time to get it and value, which I don't think is true, because if it's more complete, more accurate, and the scope is bigger, but you were able to get it faster, then you actually have something that is faster, but a lot better, a lot more, actually provide a lot more assurance. But I think what people are trying to point out is it's faster, but it's a smaller scope. It's less thing in scope, especially where, with SOC 2, you have a bit more leeway in how you can craft your controls. And my question is like, what's your vision on like some of the compliance activities getting commoditized just because we're able to get from A to Z a lot faster than a couple of years ago, where, you could have a consulting company come and like you would pay X hundred, tens of thousands of dollars, and it will also take you 6 to 12 months to get ready.
Well, I love the notion of getting more time back in my day, in my team's day, because I don't know anyone at a company that would say like, oh yeah, we're covering all of our bases and we have enough time to do our internal due diligence or assessments or evaluations or have conversations with every team that needs the support we can provide with the, like, I can imagine that at certain companies, there are certain departments that have compliance challenges or risk challenges that no one in the security team has talked to in months, if not years, because we're focused on the other areas of our company where there is a lot more inherent risk and there are more complex controls that we need to assess continuously or reevaluate the design of to figure out how to improve the design of the controls, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, like, hey, if we can streamline our work, especially in the compliance world, to free up 95% of our time, that's time back that we can focus on the harder problems in areas of our organization where process hasn't been streamlined yet. We go streamline it there. Now we've got that time back again, and we've added value and produced positive outcomes. But then there's until we build actual like super AI, super intelligent, sentient machines that can operate as good as, if not better than humans, there's a lot of reasoning oriented work, and there's a lot of complex cognitive work that needs to be done when you're talking about working within a very complex organization of hundreds of people, thousands of people, many different teams and departments with all these different lines of accountability. It can be challenging to consistently drive something like risk reduction over time at scale at an organization like that when there's so many moving parts. And that requires a lot of, in some cases, sort of curated partnership.
Yeah.
And I think the manual work or the time-intensive work that goes into traditional versions of compliance processes or GRC processes and programs in general is holding us back from being able to dedicate that time in areas where we can't automate it. So I would say, yeah, like in the context of third-party risk management, for example, I have a vision around how at some point we're all going to get better at doing third-party risk management in a way that actually streamlines how we evaluate continuously the risk our third parties pose to us in terms of their internal controls, in terms of their external attack surface. We'll talk about the problems with how that's done in the industry today later. But more importantly, the internal risk that is related to that third party risk. Like a lot of third party risk is really just first party risk. How we've implemented the vendor solution is risky. The oversharing of data that we didn't really think through as fully as we should have is creating risk with how we're engaging with this third party, right? If we can free up our time in the overarching continuous sort of due diligence work that goes into third party risk, we can spend more time tackling those more nuanced, deeper problems, especially the ones that involve understanding the internal business context or organizational context that pertains to third-party risk. But we're so stuck on the traditional version of send out this questionnaire, read through the results, read through the SOC 2 report, read through a lot of manual reading of information, which, by the way, we do have the technology to automate better with large language models and foundation models in general. Let's get to a world where our risk practitioners, our security risk practitioners can focus on the harder, higher hanging fruit problems that machines can't, and let machines do all the low hanging fruit, trivial, mundane work.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that vision. I think sometimes people get a bit scared about losing a big portion of their current job, where when you really think deeply about it, we're trying to take away like the most low leverage, low value activities you're doing to spend more time doing high value, high leverage activities where like human cognition has a lot more things to add to the conversation. Because these things are like, human to human interactions and building relationships. And sometimes like no companies have like a perfect data transparency approach. Like always you have what they call tribal knowledge, where a specific team has knowledge you should know, but you don't. And when you speak to them, coffee chat, whatever, and you actually have those conversations, you can discover sometimes, we have this whole repo and there's so much information. Maybe you would we never spoke about it before because no one reached out. And then you look at it, you're like, whoa, just learned something crazy. And like information asymmetry is crazy because they don't have the same problems to solve as you do. So maybe what they have right now in there is super critical to you, but for them it's not. So they don't really think about sharing it with you. And I think that's where building those relationships makes them more aware of like, oh, this could help security. Okay, my GRC team might need that. Whereas if they don't know you, they don't even have in their realm of like thoughts, like the security GRC part. So if they're infra is all about availability. So some things about confidentiality, maybe they're not as important. because it's not directly related to uptime and stuff. So maybe you need that info, but they don't really use it as much. And once you speak with them and you get access to it, and you're like, that's actually going to help us a ton on some of the projects we're doing. So I like that approach, because I think if you only send questionnaires and then you get back questionnaires, pen test report, SOC 2, you read through it, you have like, I don't know, red, amber, green, this passes, this does not pass. And then you do that for the other vendors. I think you miss like the forest for the trees. I think you're really focused on like, I'm nailing each and every assessment, instead of thinking about like what value add those assessments are bringing to your risk reduction, to your risk mitigation policy. And then from there thinking like, is there a way through which I can actually get a lot more done? Because, you know, there's maybe areas where you don't even speak to the people that might, you know, completely circumvent the process for vendor reviews and get access to some stuff. And now that you know it, you know, potentially a lot of data. And also the assessments, you do it at a point in time, but maybe it's out of policy after the assessment was done because of first party risk, especially.
3 hours later, like the SpongeBob meme, right? It's like, oh, all of a sudden we're sharing PHI related data, and PCI related data. What changed, guys? Also, like, why didn't you tell us sooner? Well, they shouldn't have. I mean, I have so much to say about TPRM. I won't go into it. But yeah, absolutely. The human relationship aspect of it is key, because that is what contributes to increasing trust with your partner team members, helping them keep in the realm of their thoughts, like you mentioned, security concerns, or at least the fact that there's this team over here that can help me think through security concerns that I can't think through myself or on my own fully. Let me reach out to them proactively now. I know they exist. I also enjoyed that first conversation I had with them. They seem very reasonable and practical, and they seem to get like what they're here to do to help us achieve great things as a company. Let me go partner with them on this problem, this project, this whatever.
Absolutely.
Need more of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really like a completely new area that I think is like uncharted. I think it's the area where GRC could do a lot better. And I think when people are often like criticize leaders or business leaders for not like taking security as seriously, I think those specific like efficiencies that will allow you to have more of these conversations with, you know, the leader of infrastructure, or maybe even HR and legal, and having those more like deep conversations with them around specific risks you can also take on board and track as part of the overall risk posture tracking, because you have the direct link, because risks are reported up to board level. I think it makes security a lot more strategic, because if you're not in those conversations, you're not trying to build those bridges, then they just see you as like, you know, you do your awareness, you do your assessments, you do your testing, whatever, and that's about it. You know, keep the lights on.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's so sad. Yeah, we need to do better. We all want to do better than that, of course. Yeah.
Of course. But sometimes it's not your fault, because, you know, you still have to keep the lights on, of course. But I think it's interesting and useful to still think about like the potential end state, just because you can also use that to potentially get budget, get like more opportunities to do this like engineering approach. Because if you really kind of explain in a convincing way the value add of having more free time to do these things, and how much more like visibility will bring to the security team, like the overall org will potentially like, you know, I want to say take you more seriously, but at least like, you know, think more about how these things that look like they only benefit compliance, quote unquote, they also make it a lot less hectic for any like, you know, control owners. They'll not have to go through walkthroughs and send spreadsheets and etc. So it also actually makes the relationship.
It's systems thinking, right? Hey, your organization is a system. If you can understand the machinations of the system, what the system's supposed to produce, right? The mission of your organization, the value it's trying to achieve out in the world. And if you can communicate when it comes to proposing budget or requesting budget, here are the problems we want to solve. Here's how they interrelate to the rest of the business in terms of like, we want to make our TPRM process more efficient, so we're not wasting money and time in the procurement process. And we want to make it more effective with regard to, you know, how third-party risk pertains to our organization's overall risk challenges. It looks less like the security team is asking to do security things for the sake of it. Where's the relevancy? Why should I care as a, CXO or whatever finance person who needs to approve this request? And it looks more like this person is clearly connecting the dots between problems I didn't realize we had as an organization that are originating in the security function, but are having ripple effects outward in ways that are creating disruption, friction, interference with achieving our organizational goals in these other places.
Exactly. Let's tell everyone, maybe if you want more influence or more budget, maybe you need to diagram a lot more. That would be a great tip.
Right.
So one last question I had for you is something I try to ask all of my guests. Is, if you had a magic wand, and you could solve, sometimes it's cascading, but let's say you want to solve one problem that currently plagues GRC, and you need to only pick one, because if not, it would be too easy. What would it be, and why? I know you hate TPRM, but you can't say just solve TPRM. It's too broad.
I'll try something a little different. What really comes to mind for me is risk management in general, cyber risk management, let's say, and how hard it is to maintain in real-ish time a relevant picture of the risks, the cyber risks, let's say, that are pertinent to our organization. And when I say a relevant picture, I mean both in terms of business context around, I'll just cut to the chase, fair-based methodologies for doing cyber risk quantification are so hot and so cool because they incorporate very relevant information and context into an understanding of risk when it comes to the external threat environment, the problem landscape you're trying to manage risk around, your internal business context around the things of value that are at risk of being impacted by threats. Measurably speaking, how valuable are those things? How much money could we stand to lose from fines we have to pay, and blah, 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 blah. And how all that information is rooted in some kind of objective evidence that exists in the world, threat intelligence data, data like insurance claims, cyber insurance claims data, and other publicly available information about, this data breach that involved these types of data, this volume of data, et cetera, it costs this much in these different ways. Now we can assemble that picture of risk, again, in a way that is evidence-based, that is relevant to our organization, and being able to maintain a real-time picture, because risk is constantly changing within an organization, because an organization is constantly changing. A market it exists in is constantly changing. The threat environment is constantly changing. Being able to maintain that real-time risk view so that you could, this is like a wild, dreamy vision idea I've had for a little bit. You could have a sort of risk early warning system. Like, hey, your risk profile has suddenly changed because of this other part of the risk picture, the threat landscape, your internal business context, whatever. You are now above your risk tolerance, right? Which is a phrase people use a lot, which sometimes bothers me because I don't think anyone knows what it means to even define risk tolerance. It makes sense at surface value. Anyway, I think being able to solve the problem of risk management in the context of having a real-time view and understanding into your risk, and also having roughly immediate awareness into when your risk has elevated to a level where you need to start taking imminent action and changing course. I think that's a huge, very hard problem to solve, but it's very worth solving. And there are approaches and capabilities that exist in the world that are taking us in the direction of being able to solve it that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like it. Definitely think, that I like both the more quantification aspect and also the more real-time aspect, especially real-time. I think it's like, it ties back also to a lot of like real-time monitoring of controls, etc., and having all those inputs that can help you kind of really understand in real time when it gets past
real-time controls are context about risk. They're an ingredient in the risk picture, right?
Exactly. And the risk tolerance threshold, I also have my grips with, and I agree completely with you on the fact that it's really tough to define. We'll probably need to do another podcast just on TPRM, because I understand that, third-party risk management is something that, triggers you as it triggers me. So definitely, I think but there was a lot of interesting takes. Really enjoyed the conversation. There was a lot of good
same to you,
insights. Definitely will be beneficial. I think we kind of really highlighted kind of genesis of GRC engineering, and also like in practice how it looks, kind of how to think about your program, how to think about like potential metrics for success, and also what will it allow you to do more of, because you'll gain all this time, and what high leverage activities you can focus yourselves on, and like all the amazing benefits you'll get from focusing on, stakeholder management, and also like expanding, reducing information asymmetry, and expanding the realm of known things within the company.
Yeah, right. Last plug too, check out
Yes.
grc.engineering. There's also a LinkedIn group called GRC Engineering Community. If you want to participate in the convo and learn from or contribute learnings to the community, go there.
Absolutely. We welcome everyone, as many perspectives as possible. And, completely agree. I think it's a great kind of a community-driven initiatives, which is one of the things I like the most about it. It's driven by practitioners and people that are passionate about the subject, but it also ensures it's focused mostly on making sure everyone can benefit, everyone can improve their own programs. And even if you have a traditional GRC program, I really think you can benefit a lot from it, because it's not only like step-by-step guide to do X, Y, Z, it's also a lot of new mindset shifts and way to think about problems that will also make like your own current program potentially a lot more efficient. And we're really kind of looking forward to having even contradictories or people that not agree with specific takes and stuff. Like feel free. We're super open. I think we're nice. Probably
we are.
So,
well,
yeah.
there's really only two rules in the community group in LinkedIn, at least. It's don't be a jerk and no sales pitches. That's it.
Nice.
Really
That's
easy.
what I like.
Really easy to abide by and remember, and ultimately in the service of fostering, really healthy, thriving community to drive this conversation and for us to all figure these things out together.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like it. It was a pleasure talking with you today. Definitely we'll think it's a lot of amazing kind of pieces of advice and insights into GRC engineering. And yeah, feel free to, share the podcast with everyone who's enjoying these conversations. And, if you have any potential ideas for next topics when we have Justin for the next time, please feel free to share them as well.
Thanks, Ayub.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.